I'd like to take a moment and talk about some best practices when it comes to creating calculated columns or adding new features within a dataset. So, as a best practice, table transformations and column calculations should ideally happen as close to the original data source as possible. Now, the reason behind this best practice is that when calculations happen at the source, you're able to use the original data source engine, like the SQL Server engine or the MySQL engine or Excel's workbook engine, and not rely on Power BI's engine to do these calculations. Basically, all of this boils down to optimizing Power BI reports for performance and speed. Here's a high level look at the different places where calculations should be made or added as part of a report development project. Ideally, new data features and columns are added as far upstream as possible, which means as close to the original data source as possible. And if that can't happen, then your next best option is to create calculated columns using the query editor, followed by the Power BI front end, and last in published reports or dashboards if that functionality exists. So at this point, you might be thinking that Power Query and Power BI's front end are all part of the same Power BI tool. Why is Power Query more efficient than the front end? And that's an awesome question. The reason is that Power BI's internal engine, called Vertipack, creates something called a query plan when you press load and apply to load the data into Power BI's data model. And this query plan takes all of the raw source data, transformation steps, any calculations that have been made, columns that have been added, etc. And it determines the best way to compress all of that data before loading it into Power BI's memory. Remember that lecture on storage and connection modes, right? When you're using import mode, the data is loaded into Power BI and the Vertipack engine needs to create this highly optimized plan for fast and reliable performance. So when new calculations, new columns, and other data features are added using Power BI's front end, they're not added to that same query plan and can't take advantage of the compression methods. So because of this, you might disproportionately bloat your data model size. Now, there is a lot of nuance involved here, and it's generally outside the scope of this course, but just keep in mind that when possible, add columns at the source. If you can't, then try the query editor. If that doesn't work, then use the front-end tools in Power BI. One last call out here before we move on. This best practice isn't a strict requirement or rule, but it's really something that can significantly impact performance for very large or complex data models. And I totally understand that where you define calculation often depends on several factors like accessibility to data sources, complexity, business requirements, your own ability and level within Power BI. So basically, we'll be practicing different methods to create columns using both the query editor, like we've already done, and DAX, which is found in Power BI's front end.